not into the house, about 100 and 200 betook themselves to another house with bows and arrows, and when they were all there, the Spaniards secured the doors, throwing in fire at another place, and so they all perished. From hence they set sail to the island of St. John, with near upon 180 slaves, whom they had bound, where they sold one half of them, and thence to Hispaniola, where they disposed of the rest. Now when I taxed this captain with wickedness and treachery in the very isle of St. John, he dismissed me with this answer: Forbear, good sir, I had this in commission from those who sent me hither, that I should surprise them by the specious pretence of peace, whom I could not seize by open force. And in truth this same captain told me with his own mouth, that in Trinity Isle alone he had met with a father and mother in civil usage, which he uttered to his greater confusion and the aggravation of his sins. The monks of our order of St. Dominic on a certain time held a consult about sending one of their fraternity into this island, that by their preaching they might instruct them in the Christian faith, and teach them the way to be saved, of which they were wholly ignorant. And to this end they sent thither a religious and licentiate in theology, or doctor in divinity, as we term it among us, a man famous for his virtue and holiness, with a laic his associate, to visit the country, converse with the inhabitants, and find out the most convenient places for the erection of monasteries. As soon as they were arrived according to custom, they were entertained like celestial messengers, with great affection, joy, and respect, as well as they could, for they were ignorant of their tongue, and so made use of signs for the present. It happened that after the departure of that vessel that brought these religious men, another came into the port, whose crew, according to their hellish custom, fraudulently and unknown to the religious, brought away a prince of that province as captive, who was called Alphonsus, for they are ambitious of a Christian name, and forthwith desire without farther information that he would baptize him. But the said Lord Alphonsus was deceitfully over persuaded to go on board of them with his wife and about 17 more, pretending that they would give him a collation, which the prince and they did, for he was confident that the religious would by no means suffer him be abused, for he had no so much confidence in the Spaniards. But as soon as they were upon deck, the perfidious rogues set sail for Hispaniola, where they were sold as slaves. The whole country being extremely discomposed, and understanding that their prince and princess were violently carried away, addressed themselves to these religiosos, who were in great danger of losing their lives. But they, being made to understand this unjust action, were extraordinarily afflicted, and 'tis probable would have suffered death, rather than permit the Indians to be so injuriously dealt with, which might prove an obstruction to their receiving of and believing in God's word. Yet the Indians were sedated by the promises of the religious, for they told them they would send letters by the first ship that was bound for Hispaniola, whereby they would procure the restitution and return of their lord and his retinue. It pleased God to send a ship thither forthwith, to the greater confirming of the governor's damnation, wherein the letters they sent to the religious of Hispaniola, letters containing repeated exclamations and protestations, and protest against such actions, but those that received them denied them justice, for that they were partakers of that prey, made of those Indians so unjustly and impiously captivated. But when the religious who had engaged to the inhabitants that their Lord Alphonsus should be restored within 4 months, and found that neither in 4 nor 8 months he was returned, they prepared themselves for death, and to deliver up their life to Christ, to whom they had offered it before their departure from Spain. Thus the innocent Indians were revenged on the innocent priests, for they were of opinion that the religious had a hand in the plot, partly because they found their promises that their Lord should return within 4 months ineffectual, and partly because the inhabitants made no difference between a religious friar and a Spanish rogue. At another time it fell out likewise, through the rampant tyranny and cruel deeds of evil-minded Christians, that the Indians put to death 2 Dominican friars, of which I am a faithful witness, escaping myself, not without a very great miracle, which transaction I resolved silently to pass over, lest I should terrify the reader with the horror of the fact. In these provinces there was a city seated on the Bay of Codera, whose lord was called Higueroto, a name either proper to persons or common to the rulers of that place, a cacique of such signal clemency, and his subjects of such noted virtue, that the Spaniards who came thither were extraordinarily welcome, furnished with provisions, enjoying peace and comfort, and no refreshment wanting. But a perfidious wretch got many of them on board, and sold them to the islanders of St. John. At the same time I landed upon that island, where I obtained a sight of this tyrant, and heard the relation of his actions. He utterly destroyed that land, which the rest of the Spaniards took very unkindly at his hands, who frequently played the pirate, and robbed on that shore, detesting it as a wicked thing, because they had lost that place, where they used to be treated with as great hospitality and freedom as if they had been under their own roof. Nay, they transported from this place among them to the Isles of Hispaniola and St. John 2 millions of men and upward, and made the coast a desert. It is most certainly true that they never ship off a vessel freighted with Indians, but they pay a 3rd part as tribute to the sea, besides those who are slaughtered when found in their own houses. Now the source and original of all this is the ends they have proposed to themselves, for there is a necessity of taking with them a great number of Indians, that they may gain a great sum of money by their sale. Now the ships are very slenderly furnished with provisions and water in small quantity to satisfy few, left the tyrants, who are termed owners or proprietors of ships, should be at too great expense in victualling their vessels. Nay, they scarce carry food enough with them to maintain the Spaniards that manage the vessel, which is the reason so many Indians die with hunger and thirst, and of necessity they must be thrown overboard. Nay, one of them told me this for a truth, that there being such a multitude of men thus destroyed, a ship may sail from the Isle of Lucaya to Hispaniola, which is a voyage of 20 leagues and upward, without chart or compass, by the sole direction or observation of dead fluctuating carcasses. But afterward, when arrived and driven up into the isle whither they are brought to be sold, there is no person that is in some small measure compassionate, but would be extremely moved and discomposed at the sight, viz. To spy old men and women together with naked children half starved. Then they separate parents from children, wives from their husbands, about 10 or 20 in a company, and cast lots for them, that the detestable owners of the ships may have their share, who prepared 2 or 3 ships, and equipped them as a fleet of pirates, going ashore, ravaging and forcing men out of their houses, and then robbing them. But when the lot of any one of them falls upon a parcel that hath an aged or diseased man, the tyrant, whose allotment he is, usually bursts out as followeth: Let this old fellow be damned. Why do you bestow him upon me? Must I, think you, be at the charge of his burial? And this sickly wretch, how comes he to be one of my allotted portion? Must I take care for his cure? Not I. Hence you may guess what estimate and value the Spaniards put upon Indians, and whether they practice and fulfill that divine and heavenly precept enjoining mutual love and society. There can be nothing more cruel and detestable than the tyrannical usage of the Spaniards towards the Indians in their pearl fishing, for the torments undergone in the unnatural exenteration and tearing out with parasital hands the richer bowels of our common mother, or the inward cruciating racks of the most profligate heaven-daring desperado, can admit of no comparison with these, although the extracting or digging for gold is one of the sharpest subterranean drudgeries. They plunge them down 4 or 5 ells deep under water, where, swimming about without breathing, they eradicate and pull up oysters, wherein the pearls are engendered. Sometimes they rise up to the superficies of the water with nets full of oysters for respiration and air. But if these miserable creatures stay but a little more than is ordinary to rest themselves, the hangman is immediately upon them in a canoe or small boat, who, beating them with many stripes, drag them by the hair of the head under water, that they may drudge again at their expilcation or pearl fishing. Their food is fish, and the same which contains the pearls, and cassavas made of roots, with a few mahids, the bread of that country. In the former there is little or no nutriment or substance, and the other is not made without great trouble. Nor for all this have they a sufficient allowance thereof to support nature. Their lodging or bed is the earth confined to a pair of stocks, for fear that they should run away, and it frequently happens that they are drowned with the toil of this kind of fishing, and never more seen. For the tuberoms and maroxi, certain marine monsters that devour a complete proportioned man wholly at once, prey upon them under water. You must consider withal that it is impossible for the strongest constitution to continue long under water without breathing, and they ordinarily die through the extreme rigor of the cold, spitting blood which is occasioned by the too great compression of the breast, procreated by a continued holding breath under water. For by too much cold a profluvium of blood follows. Their hair, naturally black, is changed into a combust, burnt, or sun color like that of the sea wolves, their shoulders and backs covered or overspread with a saltish humor, that they appear rather like monsters in human shape than men. They have destroyed all the Lucayans by this intolerable or rather diabolical exercise, for the customary emolument or gain of lucre, and by this means gained the value of 50, sometime 100 crowns of every individual Indian. They sell them, though it is prohibited, publicly, for the Lucayans were excellent swimmers, and several perished in this isle that came from other provinces. End of section 14. Section 15 of a brief account of the destruction of the Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arnie Horton.